After a 3-year hiatus, we're finally back face to face for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, kicking things off at this year's conference is IACP Executive Director and CEO Vincent Talucci and Deputy Executive Director and COO Terrence Cunningham. Well, first of all, thanks very much indeed for talking to us again today, and it's great to be here.
It's been too long, Stephen. It's great to see you again.
Great to be in Dallas.
It's great to be in Dallas. We're thrilled. Dallas Police Department's been fantastic. Every metric you can imagine for successful conferences there, whether it's registration or exhibits or sponsorships, number of workshop requests that we had were really off the charts this year. So yeah, every metric you can imagine has folks ready for the conference, and Dallas, as you can see behind me, is beautiful. It's been fantastic to work with.
And Terry, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to in the conference this year?
Well, I think that our members, Stephen, to be honest with you, where they haven't been together since 2019, it's been 3 years, just getting together and have in-person meetings. I think the one thing about our membership is they've had to be out there in the street working every day, so they weren't working remotely like everybody else was. But for them to be able to convene and get together and have these conversations face to face, because as you know, Stephen, policing has faced some really difficult times in the last 8 to 10 years, from Ferguson through George Floyd, through the pandemic. So there's a lot to talk about.
Do you get the feel that we're going to take up where we left off in 2019, or do you think a lot's happened since?
Oh, I think a lot has happened. First of all, I think there's been a huge turnover in chiefs. I know from my home state in Massachusetts alone, there's about 320 police chiefs in Massachusetts, and they've turned over 145. In the last 2 years. So you see a lot of new faces here. So there's a lot of people that have never been to a previous IACP conference. This is the first time they're going to walk in and see this event, which is the world's largest policing conference. As Vince mentioned earlier, the number of exhibitors, we've got well over 600 exhibitors here, the workshops. They would get some big names coming in to speak to them, between the Attorney General, Director Ray from the FBI. We've got Administrator Milgram coming from the DEA, and then Ali Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security. And they're going to hit all the big topics, from the rise in violent crime that we're looking at now to, Ann Milgram's going to talk about the changes in the drugs and the fentanyl issues that we're facing right now. I know the Secretary wants to talk a lot about just the general Homeland Security, sharing of information, domestic terrorism, what that looks like, our borders. These are all things that are concerns to our members.
So it's a lot to get our teeth into, a lot of work to do.
There's no shortage, and one of the things we were prepping earlier for the first timers orientation, and just understanding the opportunity, especially for all those folks that this is their first IACP event, how to maximize those opportunities to hear from policymakers specifically about issues that are important to them and the communities they serve, but also getting your hands on those items in the exhibit hall that you haven't been able to be hands-on in a long time. I just think there's ample opportunity to really maximize, whether it's the 200 workshops that we have, or again, as Terry mentioned, the 600 and some exhibitors, the policymakers. Chiefs Night, it will be a nice time to get back together again at Gilley's in Dallas, where there will be a special surprise at the end of Chiefs Night that night. So stay tuned on Monday for what that special surprise may be. We'll be announcing it. But there's something to be had for everybody, regardless of whether you've been at IACP or not before.
I guess my last question would be, what do you want people to take away from the conference?
As you mentioned earlier, Stephen, policing has changed a lot, and in some ways it hasn't changed. Whether you go back to the 1960s and the 1970s, we were talking about trust, and we were talking about communities back then. We were talking about community policing. But I think what we've seen in the last number of years, last probably 4 or 5 years, is kind of that shift towards, what does transparency really look like, right? We've talked about it, but what is it? Is it just the kind of the ubiquitous use of body-worn cameras? Is it meeting with the communities? I think that when we start to look at, from the George Floyd incident and some of the things that flowed out of there, the use of force, our consensus use of force policy, and the adoption of that by a number of agencies, not only across the nation but around the world. But I think right now we've seen a huge shift, and this is, IACP just recently had an intelligence and information sharing summit that we held with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. we need to get back to looking at not just the international terrorism, but more so domestic terrorism right now. So that's a shift that we haven't seen. And I think you're going to see a lot of conversations around that at this conference, and hopefully a lot of takeaways for our members.
I think they'll also get perspective. Our membership is at an all-time high right now with over 32,000 members in 170 countries. So it doesn't matter if you're from Peoria, Illinois, or the UAE, there's something to be shared across the policing spectrum here at the IACP. So I think understanding that perspective that you play an important role not only in your respective community, but on the global policing stage for sharing those much needed best practices. And there's no place quite like the IACP conference to be able to convene and share and learn and take those lessons back to your respective communities.
Well, thank you both very much indeed for taking time to talk to us today. I hope you have a great conference. I know you will, so thank you.
No, thank you, Stephen.
Good to see you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks.